And he was brainstorming how to do this when the phone rang. It was a parishioner wanting him to do a graveside service. And he readily said, yes, sure, no problem. He hung up the phone and realized he didn't know where the cemetery was. But he wasn't going to let that stop him. And the day of the service, he got into his car and he was going to get to that cemetery and do the service, and yet he got lost. And he drove around for quite some time, and it was too late. He found the cemetery, but everybody was gone. And, well, there was the mound of dirt, so he was bound and determined to say the prayers that he was going to say. So he went to the mound of dirt, and he said the prayers. And as he walked back to his car, there were two workers that had been watching him. And the one worker turned to the other worker and said, my, those are the finest words I've ever heard over a septic system. Now, I'm a new pastor, but I guarantee you I'm not that good. So, my name is John Hazen. I'm a licensed local pastor in the Wisconsin Conference of the United Methodist Church. I have been a licensed local pastor for 24 years. I'm in my 24th year of ministry right now. My previous appointments were Bay City for 2 years, Plum City, Maiden Rock, Ono for 12 years, Stanley Thorpe Cadoc for 3 years, and the last 6 years at the Willow River Parish of Clear Lake, Deer Park, and Forest. I'm glad to be here on this circuit. Just to give you a little history, my parents live in Menominee. My dad is 86 and he resides at the American Lutheran Home, and my mom is 82, going to be 83 in September. They had 5 kids, 4 boys and a girl. You can imagine we teased my sister quite a bit when we were kids because, of course, she was the youngest and so easier to tease. The oldest boy died at the age of 17 when I was 15 in a car crash. It was a practical joke pulled on him by 3 of his friends, and you know, one of those boys will be boys kind of things, but it turned into something, well, much worse than that. It took us a while to get through that, but God pulled us through. God always pulls us through. I have a brother currently living in Menominee, a brother currently living in Elk Mound, and a sister living in Geneva, Minnesota. We don't call her a traitor or anything just because she lives in Minnesota. She's still a card-carrying packer no matter what. If you're not, if you're a Viking fan, that's okay, because God loves everybody. So, our second president of the United States, John Adams, once said, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for a government of any other." In other words, unless our country remains Christian, the Constitution will not function properly. So is John Adams right? Can our society survive without the Christian faith? There are many who would say that religion doesn't have the influence it once had, and I would probably agree with that statement. But they go on to say that religion is no longer relevant, that it is not necessary to creating a good world, that there are no absolutes, no objective truths. Are they right? Dennis Prager was a Jewish social critic and scholar, and he always answered this question with a story. Say that you're walking down an alley at 11 p.m. at night in New York, Miami, or Los Angeles. The dim streets illuminate your car about 300 yards away. And suddenly you see 10 young men in leather jackets swaggering down the alley toward you. Now, would you feel more comfortable if you knew that those 10 young men had just gone to a Bible study? Every time Prager asked that question, the answer was yes. And in spite of what they say in polls, on the most practical level, people always acknowledge religion's positive influence. Our society cannot exist without Christianity. Our very Constitution will not work without the restraints of religion. Religion is necessary for a civil society. So let me ask you a similar question. Can Christianity exist without the cross? Earlier I quoted John Adams. It reminded me of those who say we should have the faith of our founding fathers. And I would say, be careful of what you ask for. Most of the founding fathers were what we call deists. And deists believed that God created the whole world and everything in it, but that God was in heaven and not here on earth and not involved in our daily activities. That God left us and stayed in heaven and left us to ourselves. And if you've ever read the Jefferson Bible, when you do, if you do, and I would recommend it, but when I read it, I found it was just a collection of wise sayings of Jesus Christ. And that's because Thomas Jefferson didn't believe in miracles. Thomas Jefferson never believed in miracles, so he rewrote the Bible to his liking. He took out the birth of Jesus, he took out the death of Jesus, he took out all the miracles, and it's just a collection of wise sayings. So, next time you hear someone say, we should have the faith of our founding fathers, tell them to be careful of what you ask for. Jesus says, all who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross and follow me. Now, I believe that saying no to themselves means that they put Jesus first in their lives, that they deny themselves by placing themselves secondary to God and to Jesus. They say no to themselves and they say yes to Jesus. What is carrying the cross? Jesus never said the life of a disciple would be an easy one. In fact, Jesus says the opposite. The life of a disciple will have problems, will have trials and tribulations. Our problems in the world are many. However, we are not to give in to those problems. We're to meet them with Jesus at our side and with God in our hearts. When those problems seem to weigh us down, we're to cling to Christ even more. We're to carry our cross and follow him. Sometimes it seems we have a ton of crosses to bear. That is one reason Jesus is here, to give us comfort and refuge. Our faith has been purchased at a great cost. In our reading, Jesus has just revealed to his disciples that he is the Messiah, and that he must face death and resurrection. Imagine the turmoil this causes among the disciples. Peter goes so far as to rebuke Jesus, an act which causes Jesus to denounce the spirit of Satan within Peter. Can there be people upon whom we have placed our own hopes and dreams to such an extent that we've lost sight of the bigger picture? In response to Peter, Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Now, did he just do that? Did he just call Peter Satan? No, he didn't. Jesus is saying that Peter is letting Satan influence him. Jesus says, you're not thinking God's thoughts, but human thoughts. Peter's the impulsive one. When he heard Jesus say the word suffer and die, he just jumped in there. He didn't hear the word resurrection. If he had, he might have acted differently. He would have been fine if he heard that word resurrection. Jesus basically told Peter that he was letting Satan influence him. I believe that we all have a picture of God that we carry around with us. Those pictures, by and large, are both unconscious and unvoiced. They're there, shaping our expectations, actions, surfacing only when those pictures are questioned. Peter recognized Jesus as the Messiah, but he didn't understand what kind of Messiah Jesus must be. Perhaps he was looking for another King David. Perhaps he wanted someone to lead a rebellion. Perhaps he longed for a champion to chase away the Romans. We don't know for sure. We know is that he did not expect Jesus to be a weak, vulnerable Messiah who was going to end up crucified on a cross. So contrary was this to his thinking, to his expectations, to his picture of God and his picture of the Messiah, that he couldn't even hear the second part of what Jesus said. I don't think we can blame Peter. Very often we also want a God of strength and power to make things better in the world and in our lives. Fortunately, neither Peter nor we get the God we wanted. We got the God we needed. We get, that is, a God who will not remain in heaven, aloof to our problems. This God favors mercy over strength, forgiveness over judgment, grace and vulnerability over power and glory. This God not only understands us, but loves us as well. So, how adaptable are you? In today's culture, it's a key question, not just for individuals, but for businesses and companies. Are you able to adapt to our culture's changing landscape, to calamities that come our way, to unplanned events, to change? Let's face it, change is the only constant in the world. When a hurricane hit Roger Hammond's home in Florida, he had to evacuate, taking with him just some personal items. And when he returned home 2 days later, his home was gone, washed away with the tide. Within a day, Roger had bought a portable home. It's a new trend. Unlike simple mobile homes, a portable home can look like a cabin, like a cottage, like a lodge. It can look like anything you want. Roger situated his portable home several miles from his home until he could start to rebuild. Roger has an adaptable personality. He takes change in stride. He's a problem solver, not a lamenter. When tragedy strikes, Roger is always ready to take that next step. His hope and his ideas about what his life needs to look like can change. Roger will still be happy. He has little need to control his environment or his outcomes. He simply goes with the flow. Roger is not the norm. Most of us are not like that. Most of us have a bit more trouble adapting. That is what God will help us with. God will help us through the changes of life. Because as I said, change is the only constant of life. God will help us through that change. However, Jesus also tells us not to conform to the world. We don't follow the world, we follow Jesus Christ. We do what Jesus would do. And that was Peter's problem. He was conforming to the world. He was thinking human thoughts, not the thoughts of God. Satan was taking Peter toward those human thoughts and away from God's thoughts, and that must never happen. We must never allow that. In verse 25, Jesus says, all who want to save their lives will lose them, but all who lose their lives because of me will find them. How can you save your life and lose your life? Those in this world who save their lives are those who put their lives above all things, even God. They're the ones who crave the corner office and the yacht and the $1 million salary. There's nothing wrong inherently with those items, but if you shove God aside to get them, then you basically lose your life in eternity. Those who let sin rule their lives in order to get everything they ever wanted will lose their life in eternity. Those who put God above all things are the ones who lose their life here on earth. They're not dead, they're just secondary to God. They're the ones who ask the questions, what would Jesus do? They're the ones who will find their lives in eternity. In verse 28, Jesus said, I assure you that some standing here won't die before they see the human one coming in his kingdom. That's a troubling statement for some. Obviously, Jesus hasn't come again, not yet. Those who were listening to Jesus that day are no longer alive. They're long gone. So how can Jesus say this? He says it because it's true. Those listening to Jesus may be physically gone from this earth, but they are not dead. They are living in eternity with Jesus. That's a basic promise of Scripture. Those who believe will live in eternity with Jesus. That is something we can expect because that's a promise from God in Scripture. So those who listen to Jesus that day are still alive in eternity. It just reminds me that whatever Jesus says is truth. Truth for our lives today.